Hello and welcome to another episode of Cavell Cloud Conversations with me, Finbarr Begley, Senior Analyst at Cavell. I'm joined today by Dag Peak, CPTO at Alianza. How are we doing, Dag?
Finbarr, I am doing great. It is a beautiful sunny day here in London and great to be on with you.
Brilliant. I mean, I have just come back from Florida where it was 30 degrees, so coming back to 18 degrees in London is actually quite pleasant.
Yeah.
Swamps are not good when it's hot. They're really not.
No, I prefer the way it is right out there today.
Exactly. So you're on today, and one of the conversations we've been having broadly, and obviously you were at the Cavell Summit doing a keynote a few weeks ago, is, you have this understanding that the way that many service providers are approaching thinking about AI is just not flawed, but just too focused on one area. Would you like to expand more on that idea?
Yeah, definitely not flawed because I understand their approach and the approach makes sense. But let's talk about this. I guess it really is a dichotomy. So service providers are looking at the incredible advancements in AI, and they're thinking to themselves, how can we apply this to the service provider business? Great. What they're doing, though, is focusing it in on what I call the efficiency side of their business, right? Efficiencies. Service providers have been focused for a very long time on driving cost out of the network. And so AI comes along, and this becomes a pretty powerful way to reduce, the amount of time they spend patching their systems, maintaining their systems, whatever. So, they're spending a lot of time. And actually, there was an announcement today about a partnership between NVIDIA and AWS for telco. And when you look into what they're talking about there, they're really talking about use cases of leveraging AI to drive efficiencies in the operator's network. Great. But our hypothesis here at Alianza is that you've got to do more than just figure out how to drive efficiencies in the network, right? And it's this fundamental notion that a service provider has to deliver more than just a connection. They've got to find a way to deliver more value. The particular angle that we take on that is delivering more value in communications services. So it's this idea of AI, sure, applying it to the efficiencies in the network, but also thinking about how to drive AI on the communications services side of the equation. So that's it's an interesting notion. How can a service provider leverage AI to bring really interesting and potentially, what we say is hyper verticalized solutions to their customers? So that's what we're talking about on that front.
I think it's really interesting because when you look at it, if all you're doing is making our current ways of working more efficient, you don't really stop to move on to that. How should we be working differently? And how can we be working better, I guess? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. How we work. And that's a really interesting notion. Let's think about how you and I work, Finbarr, right? So here we are on this, on your podcast. We're actually just doing this in Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
You and I are what I would consider to be a knowledge worker, right? We sit at a desk in front of computers. And the fact is, you and I are very, very well served with AI. Like sitting in front of me right now is a Word document. Actually, this is the Word document that has some of the outline of our Cavell Cloud Conversations podcast. And at the top of it, there's a little Copilot generated summary. It's right there in front of me. I'm sitting here in Teams. We could turn Copilot for Teams on. We could get a transcript. We could get a summary.
It is running, in fact. On my side, it is running.
It's running, right? So you and I are using AI as we speak. But I ran some interesting math this morning, right? I was thinking about how many users of Teams there are on the planet versus how many people there are on the planet. Okay, so the last numbers that I saw is that there's about, 340 million monthly active users of Teams, right? Teams is doing great. but that only represents about 5% of the worldwide population. Okay.
Yep.
So how are the other 95% of the people on this planet communicating? Where's my phone? The other 95% of the people on the planet are communicating with this thing, right? They are making phone calls. They are sending text messages. They are not Teams users. Now, of course, Microsoft would love if every single human on the planet was primarily using Teams as their communications platform, but that's not going to happen. People want to call each other. People want to text each other. Not every interaction is going to be a video session like you and I have.
Exactly.
So with that in mind, how about we take some of that incredible AI power that is being deployed into networks today, right? Giant data centers filled with racks and racks of NVIDIA GPUs, large language models on top of that. Why don't we take some of that infrastructure and use it to deliver interesting Copilot style capabilities for just regular calling, right? Here's a use case. So imagine that you're a real estate agent driving down the road. You're talking to a client, like you're on the way to a showing and you're talking to another client. That client asks you about some house. Wouldn't it be nice if you had a real estate Copilot on the call with you that could just go out and get the price of that house and the number of bedrooms and the nature of the backyard, whisper that to you as the real estate agent, and have you pass that along to the client? Right? Here's another one. This is the one you and I were talking about earlier. Why have we not yet implemented real-time language translations between two people on a phone call? Like I only speak English. I'm an American. I'm not proud of it, but I only speak English.
Yeah.
If I want to call somebody in France and they don't speak English, wouldn't it be nice if I could just hit a star code while I'm on that call and get a real-time translation between the person who speaks French and the person who speaks English? I mean, we can do this, right? The technology exists. The power to do this exists. Get a couple of NVIDIA GPUs, get a large language model that's optimized for real-time translations. It totally exists. And so the question becomes, why has this not been rolled out yet? I mean, there are plenty of companies out there that would pay real money to have real-time translations between them and their customers, between them and their coworkers, et cetera. To me, it's kind of mind-boggling that this doesn't exist yet.
I was thinking of a use case myself, actually. So I was at Enterprise Connect recently, and they had an enterprise panel. They were talking about the uncertainty of the future and how they're going to handle AI and stuff. And they had a company called Werner up there, who are a trucking company from the States, quite large. And their actual AI use case is kind of similar to what you're describing, where they need more real-time data on whether the trucks are on schedule, whether everything's going correct. Are they going to make their ETA? Are they going to make their deadline? But obviously, they're not going to get the trucker to stop, phone in, update, stop driving, all of these things that the trucker doesn't want to do, because that might add delays in if you have to report 5 times and stop and make a phone call. So they're deploying AI in a voice-based system to call those truckers, ask a simple question. Are you still going to make your deadline? Are you running late? What's the delay like? And then taking that data and feeding it back into the system. And then the outcome is the system is getting real-time updates from every trucker in the network. Who's delayed, who isn't, where are they going? And suddenly that frontline use case actually changes, because you have that real-time data feed without actually, I think the big thing that we come back to when we talk about this kind of thing is without making the life of the person on the front line harder. Because it's easy for us when we're working with Word, spend a bit of time. We've got a lot of time in, Knowledge Worker to think about how I phrase a prompt to get, because it's an efficiency eventually. But when you've got someone driving a car or dealing with patients on the front line, they don't actually have time free from tasks as often. So then the facilitation.
So what channel should they be using? They should be using the voice channel.
Yeah, their ears and their mouth, right? Just to speak
their ears and their mouth.
Yeah.
Listen, there's two really key notions here. There's two key notions that I love. Notion number one, the fundamental the most fundamental way that humans communicate, the most fundamental way that humans transmit information back and forth between each other is the same way you and I are doing it right now via the sound of our voice. Voice is fundamental to human communications. So using AI to enrich the way that we communicate, I love that concept. There's so many things that we can do, so many use cases that we can drive on top of this channel. That's point number one. Point number two, when you think about how large language models work, they have basically consumed all of the information that is out there basically on the internet, right? They've pulled that all into their models. Yep. And it's basically all been sucked in. There's basically no more information, natural information for the large language models to consume. So two things have got to happen. Number one, sure, you can generate synthetic information to train models. That's a thing. But why not tap into the way that humans communicate, right? The sound of our voice and the information that we communicate is another extremely valuable feed of data into the AI machine. And it is untapped at this point. It really is. So what we're doing here at Alianza is working on ways to do exactly what we're talking about, right? Bring copilots to the real estate agent and to the lawyer, bring copilots to the truck driver, but also use AI as a way to expose enterprise data, right? There is so much information being transmitted between employees. It should be captured and leveraged by the enterprise to help drive that enterprise forward. So many different really interesting use cases when we think about AI and voice services in particular.
Yeah, but I think bringing it back to your original point, like if you just think about how to make your existing processes more efficient, you're seeing this much of the picture. You're seeing a sliver, a drop in the ocean of where we're actually going to end up going.
Yes, and that was, if you're just thinking about using AI to optimize your RAN, okay, great. You definitely got to optimize your RAN so that we can get higher performance connections wherever you happen to be walking around in a city like London. Great. But man, there's so many things that we can do on top of that network that I want the service providers to be thinking of. And that's the message I really want to throw out into the market right now.
Yeah, I agree completely. And again, tying it back to Enterprise Connect and things like that from the show, there was a discussion about, are we at the stage of the industry where people are just basically deploying siloed AI point solutions with no thought about how those point solutions are going to integrate more broadly once they've been deployed. And then in 2 to 3 years' time, that point solution will still be there doing exactly what it was deployed to do with no data coming in from anywhere else. And again, you're taking the new tool to solve one problem rather than thinking about the entire issue and moving it forwards.
Yeah. I've seen lists of voice AI companies that have hundreds of companies on them. There are so many companies out there, little 2 or 3 man shops, little 30 or 40 person shops, who have recognized that there's going to be enormous value to unlock when we take AI with voice. And so we've got to find ways to enable this, right? We've got to find ways to bring all these AI services into the voice networks. We're exploring some really interesting concepts about what that could mean. But yeah, the phrase that I'm using, actually, this is interesting. We had a really good conversation with some senior executives at Deutsche Telekom when we were at MWC a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. They came in and said, listen, we really like what you, Alianza, are doing with Metaswitch, kind of rescuing Metaswitch from the trash bin, because DT relies on about a number of Metaswitch components in their network. And what they really wanted to talk about was this idea of a renaissance in voice. And that was the words that they used, right? This renaissance in voice. Mm-hmm. They see exactly what we're talking about. They are playing both sides of the equation. First, of course, they're trying to drive real efficiencies and optimizations out of their core network infrastructure. Cool. But they're also saying at the same time, once we have a really optimized kind of cloud native sort of voice network, we can start to deliver really interesting services off of it. So they're one of the service providers globally that I think is taking a really progressive view of how to modernize and optimize network infrastructure, while at the same time thinking about how they are going to layer on really interesting value-added services on top of it. I think they're a really interesting model for service providers around the world to look at on how you can actually do both and not just focus on the efficiency front.
Brilliant. And I'm glad you brought up Metaswitch because I have it on my notes here. The acquisition, I think, was finalized on the 3rd of March. So you have now been running Metaswitch for 2 weeks as of when we're recording this podcast. And I know certainly Cavell's been getting questions what's happening with Metaswitch, and it's definitely interesting when one large company acquires a company, they have it for a little bit, and then someone else steps in and says, look, I mean, whatever you're doing with that, it's okay, but I think we can do a lot more with what that company is, and then buys it from them. So, and especially interesting when Microsoft does it, because they're such a big company. It's like they decide to focus on something for a while, then they realize that they actually want to focus on a different area, and I think sometimes people have a perception that means that company isn't doing the right thing or something like that. But it's really just a Microsoft is so big that when they decide not to focus on something, it can still be a huge business to someone else, right? It's just not a Microsoft thing. Maybe I'm putting words into your mouth there, but
no,
do you want to talk about?
Keep going because you got it. You got it. No, and listen, it's we've been operating the business for 2 weeks, right? So it's been great because just like you said, Microsoft decided that they didn't want this business anymore. They didn't want this technology. It wasn't important to them. They had bigger fish to fry, right? They're very focused on Azure. They're very focused on AI. That's great. That's where they're focused on. But what we are focused on is service provider infrastructure, service provider modernization, service provider transformation. And the Metaswitch platforms fit so sweetly into that. They are critical core elements that are embedded deeply in service provider networks around the world. And we are going to continue to support those platforms and continue to support our service providers on their modernization and transformation journey. And I tell you, the customers that we are having conversations with now that we actually do run the business are pretty enthusiastic about what they're hearing from us, right? They walk in our first meetings with a bit of kind of understandable, healthy skepticism. Right? Microsoft is getting rid of this business. Who are you guys? What are you going to do with it? We hear them out. And then we tell the story of like, listen, we love these platforms. We're going to support you on these platforms for a very long time. We're going to innovate on these platforms. We're going to bring everything that we've been talking about, right? This notion of AI for telephony, copilot for dial tone. We're bringing that to these platforms. And once these customers realize that they have a partner that they're going to be able to work with for many years to come, they relax and they start to get into a much better emotional place. So the last 2 weeks have been really awesome, both on the employee side, right? A bunch of Microsoft Azure for Operators employees came across. I've been on this grand tour of the UK, meeting a bunch of these people, and they've just been absolutely wonderful and fantastic. And then also the customer conversations have just been really, really invigorating because they understand why we're optimistic and they want to partner with us. So the last 2 weeks have really been just absolutely tremendous for us here at Alianza.
That's good to hear. I mean, I can kind of understand that energy when your product is a small product in Microsoft. You're kind of thinking, are we important to them? What's the future? And then when it gets retaken by, a specialist in the telecoms industry with a passion for telecoms, with all of those operator relationships, suddenly you're like, am I important to these guys? And maybe I am, right? This is what they do. And then it becomes much more reassuring, but a little bit of trepidation because,
No, that's how they're coming in. And I get it. I posted something on LinkedIn this morning. I called it the look. And it was all about, how they come in with that trepidation and that, who are these guys? But by the end of the meeting, right, you can see them leaning forward, opening up. There was a couple of Swiss guys that I actually saw like a little hint of a smile and I felt that was just a huge win. So yeah, it's been great, right? The state of the industry is super interesting right now. We feel very well positioned with both our Metaswitch portfolio and our cloud portfolio. Customers are responding, employees are enthusiastic. It is a really good time to be part of Alianza right now.
Brilliant. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I think we're coming up on just time on the podcast. I guess I wanted to just check in. Is there anything else you want to leave listeners with? Any thoughts you'd like them to take away?
Yeah. What would I like people to take away? Yeah, it is that notion that, so for those of us in the telecommunications space, right, a lot of us have been doing telco for a very long time, and maybe telco and communication services had started to feel a little bit stagnant. Well, that's changing now. The AI revolution is reaching out even into these stodgy old industries like telco, right? These old telecom companies with these big giant networks, all this infrastructure, not able to move fast. Now we can take AI and old school telco and bring these two worlds together. And that concept right there is why I always say, it's what I've been saying recently, there never has been a more interesting time to be part of the telco industry as there is right now as we bring these two worlds together. So that's what I want to leave people with, is this idea that, you know, we are at the cusp of some really interesting new ways of connecting people, connecting humanity, increasing the overall connectedness of the world that I really, really love.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll echo that sentiment as an analyst focused on this space. You know, even a few years ago when I got into being an analyst in this space, and you were looking at it being like, okay, collaboration, video calling.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's exciting.
Okay.
And now we're talking about
cat heads and blurry backgrounds. Woo.
Yeah. But now it's like, what does a smile mean on someone from a certain country when they link it with certain words in terms of their intent and sentiment on a call? As you said, getting a slight smile from someone from Switzerland or Germany is different from someone from the UK, right? But you can mine that conversational data in a way that we've never been able to before, and it's only going to become more fascinating where this goes next. So I mean, I echo your enthusiasm about the future. And if you are enthusiastic about this topic as well and would like to hear more from this podcast, I love these segues.
There we go.
Follow, subscribe, share it on your LinkedIn, because just because it came up on yours, it doesn't mean it came up on your colleagues or your friends. And that really helps people see what we're doing and listen to what's going on. Other than that, I'll say thank you to Dag, and I'll say goodbye to everyone.
All right. It was a pleasure, Finbarr. Thanks for everybody for listening in.
Thank you, and goodbye.